Here we go. Hi, this is Ricky Spencer, and as part of our Sociology of Media Voices series, today I've got someone really special, someone unique in some ways, who has lived a very interesting life. And I feel as though rather than me giving a little intro about her, I would like her to do it. If you to kind of really get into knowing Jac Tomlins. Welcome to our series. Tell us the Jac Tomlins story.
Crikey, that could be a long one. I feel like I've been around for a while, and that story might go a few different ways. So I'll begin. Maybe I'll begin when I came out. I won't give you a blow-by-blow account, but I kind of mark, I suppose, my advocacy work when I came out at 24 as a teacher in London. That was a really critical time. It was under Margaret Thatcher. There was some legislation called Clause 28, which was really designed to, it was about not promoting homosexuality was the wording. And it had a very significant impact on teachers and on schools and on local education authorities. So I started teaching in the high school, and very quickly what happened was there were students kind of hovering at my door at the end of the day, and they used to just kind of hang out and come, and it was a safe place. I'd only just come out myself, really. And over time, more and more used to come, and I went out one day and bought a cheap kettle and some mugs and a jar of coffee. And really, it was probably the first sort of, teenage queer support group in the school. There really weren't that sort of thing around at that time. And it kind of went from there. And I realized pretty early on that the most important thing that I could do for those kids, apart from providing them as a safe place, is to be out myself as a teacher. And that was it was probably quite a difficult, politically, quite a difficult climate to do that at that time. But it was, I just felt a real compulsion to do that. And so I came out in a blaze of glory in the end of my first year of teaching. And it was, for me, it was the start of a very long lifetime, really, of advocacy. I don't know, I'm up to about 35, 36 years now. And still in contact with some of those young kids who I came out and were then able to really start to feel safe in their school.
That's interesting, Jac, because as a transgender identified teacher myself, I have struggled to find my voice not so much in the classroom, because I feel that students are in many ways quite understanding, but it's my environment around me that is some of the bureaucracy, the management systems around. How did you find that coming out as a teacher at that time, which, as we know, with Margaret Thatcher, we've got the idea of liberalism, sense of doing things a certain way, gendering roles, firming. How did you feel as a young a teacher, a lesbian who really was wanting that authenticity into that space?
It was, when I look back, it was a risky call, but I think a calculated risk at the time. And I think in the weeks previously, I had come out to my heads of department, so my immediate bosses, if you like, and also my union rep. The unions were quite big at that time. And so I did feel that I had the support, but there were certainly teachers who were losing their jobs at that time, when they were coming out. But it was, I don't know, young and stupid, maybe, these things. I was 24, and I felt really compelled to do it, I think, by the students, by those young kids, because for them, they were bold and they were brave, and that they were kind of on the cusp of being out. Some of them were out, and I thought, well, crikey, if those 15-year-old kids can do it, then I can. And my being out would be the single most important thing for their safety. And for them, that was every day at school. So I did feel a certain compulsion to do it. And yeah, I don't know what that is. I've always felt that. I just feel like if you can, sometimes you got to raise your head above the crowd. And that's always been really important to me since then.
So how many years then, Jac, were you pursued your career in teaching?
Not for very long. I taught for 3 years in London, and then after that, I came to Australia. I travelled, took a year out, ended up in Melbourne. I did do a little bit of teaching, supply teaching in Broadmeadows. A friend of mine who was here worked in the school, and then from then I actually ended up at La Trobe Uni, working in the SRC with for the women's officer. And so did a few years at La Trobe, and then in their equal opportunity unit, and that was however many years ago. And from then, since then, I've done a range of different things around writing, consultancy, a lot of stuff around advocacy and campaigning. I do a lot of work around professional development and training for organizations. So one of the key things I do now is I try to work out and work with organizations who want to be more inclusive, particularly sort of health and human services. So I think so after teaching, I ended up as the Women's Research Officer, working for the Women's Officer at La Trobe in their SRC, and I did a number of years there, curiously with a few people who went on to be advocates who I worked with on many different campaigns later. And then in the Equal Opportunity Unit, I did work around disability. And then I kind of took a break, and Sarah and I, my partner, we've been together for, I lose track, a number of years. We decided to go traveling. And I'd always fancied myself as a writer. I'd wanted to write. And so we did this fantastic overland trip in Africa. And throughout the trip, I wrote, back of buses, night by candlelight. And then when we came back over the next year or so, I turned that into a book, which was my first published book, which was a kind of travel narrative, fun story about two women who go on an adventure, in their 30s. And I've done quite a lot of writing since then, and that's one of the things for me that I really love to do. And I suppose the other kind of area of work for me is really around change. It's about how do we create change? How do we create cultural safety? And how do we do that within organizations and services? And for me, I suppose at the age I've reached now, and all of the things that I've done over the last 30 plus years have brought me to that place where I feel like that's actually something I know how that works. I know how to do change. I take whatever opportunity I can now to share that. And that's both in a kind of campaigning and advocacy space, and also in an organizational consultancy space.
So tell us, Jac, a little bit about the media spaces that you use in your work within media, because how has the change of having digital platforms, has it enabled you to have more of a stronger advocacy to reach more of our community? Or
look, interestingly, so a lot of the stuff we did, I think one of the, media is critically important, as we know, has been critically important, I think. And I'm pretty sure that Sarah and I were the first lesbians to be photographed for print media and to be on the telly, on the news.
Oh, can you tell us a little bit about that time?
Oh, well, look, this was way back. So, what are we talking? How old's my son? So probably 20 plus years ago, 25. And in Victoria, As a single woman or as a lesbian, you did not have access to fertility treatment.
Oh,
So
okay.
this was around the laws that governed IVF.
Mm-hmm.
Nor as a non-biological parent could you have your name on your child's birth certificate. So there was a long-running campaign. There was a 5-year campaign that was run by Felicity Marlowe,
Mm-hmm.
who many of you will know, who's done a huge amount of work in this and other spaces.
Yes, absolutely.
And but in those days, people, especially people around who had kids or wanted to have kids, were really, really reluctant to be public. And now, I mean, this is the thing I think you have to remember on some days when you think, oh, it's awful, and we're very negative about where we're at, is that there was a time when people were very, very nervous about putting themselves out there, about appearing in public. And I'm pretty sure that, like I said, sometimes you just have to raise your head above the crowd. That there's bits of footage that they used repeatedly, because I think for a while we were the only people who they had. And they came to the house and it was like, this is a lesbian couple in their kitchen. This is a lesbian couple making tea. This is a lesbian couple, sitting on the couch. And they're in the print media too, for pictures of us or whatever. And for a while, that was really, really powerful and important. And I think it was a way of spreading the word about what we were talking about. And it was really it was an opportunity for us to show people, like, this is Sarah and me. We're just kind of ordinary folk. Sarah is a lawyer, I'm a teacher and a writer. We live in a house, we make tea. It was like, we're really not that scary.
Exactly. And this fascinates me too, Jac, because it was a time when many of us, similar age to yourself, who desperately wanted, there was a point of time where I felt like I wanted children, but felt, well, I can't, or there was the door wasn't open in terms of gay sort of adoption, gay men sort of pursuing, and it was a complex area, as you mentioned, with the law and that. So how did it feel for you and your partner at that time? Did you feel that by becoming public, all of a sudden your lives, are kind of put out there for everyone to see?
Well, they absolutely were. And we have some friends who used to say they knew how many kids we had, because we would appear in the newspaper with, this was our firstborn, and then a couple of years later, oh, now there's 2 of them, and then now there's 3 of them. So, for a while, we were part of that campaign, and then we moved into marriage equality, and we were part of that too. So it did feel like, I remember when we would be interviewed in the paper, and at that time they would say, look, we're going to get some quotes from you, but we're all for balance, we're going to get some quotes from the other side. And that balance was generally George Pell.
Oh,
it was the balance.
Okay, that was the balance, the hierarchical religious privilege.
That's right. Or there was a guy called Nicholas Tonti-Filippini, who was a Catholic ethicist, right? So it would be us, me, and George Pell, or Tonti-Filippini, and that would be for balance. And certainly, we had a nasty thing put in the mailbox. We had I was writing quite a lot at this time, and we got some horror comments before we realized you could ask the editor to close off the comments, but we had some horror comments. And so, certainly we did feel that there was a certain level of scrutiny there. But at the same time, we also felt like, we could do it with all of that bucket load of privilege, white, middle class, educated, safe. We felt, and I felt like it was, I'm not going to say it was easy for us, because it wasn't, but I don't know, we just made a decision that we were going to do it, and we did it, and we kind of copped a bit of flack. But, that's kind of what you do. That's what we
And
did anyway.
tell me, as a result of your advocacy, how did the rainbow families come about? Was it something that yourselves thought we've got to do something to
Yeah,
find other
there were
people?
a number. So there's a bunch of other folk, sort of lesbian women my age. As I say, I mentioned Fliss and her partner Sarah, Ruth McNair, Sam Walsh, and there were kind of like a gang of us, if you like, who all, you know, we've all now got adult children, or they're just turning 18. So it was around about that time. And really we just, you know, it started off with people just kind of meeting informally, and then it was the Rainbow Families Council that was set up, and that was Ruth and Fliss, and as I say, this bunch of other women mostly, but there were some guys in there too. And then it started, as I say, as a fairly kind of informal support group, and then with that campaign that Fliss led for law reform, that kind of, you know, cemented it. And that's still running. And then, you know, there was a website and some so information and resources. And one of the things I've done in my writing is, you know, I've written a fair amount of stuff, resources for families, because there isn't much. So there's a kind of a big research project that I did a few years ago, and then I've worked with Sydney Rainbow Families to turn that into some individual resources. So one for the early years, preschool, one school support, and then I did one for trans and gender diverse parents a bit later, because that was a bit of a gap. There wasn't anything. So I worked with a bunch of fantastic trans parents, and that's in that resource too. And then apart from that, yeah, then I wrote a novel, a kid's novel.
Oh, can you tell us the title, please?
It is called The Curse of Grandma Maple, and it's not in the shops, because I published it myself. I'd published 2 other books prior to that with mainstream publishers, but I really wanted to do this one myself. So people can buy it from my website. But I wanted to write a book for kids. You know, when we read stories to our kids when they were little, you know, you just change, oh, it's a mum and a dad, so you go 2 mums, and you change the language and the gender, and I wanted a book. I wanted a book where there was a rainbow family that just happened to be a rainbow family. It wasn't about having 2 mums or 2 dads or a trans parent, because there are some of those books out there. But I just wanted a book that was a fun story. It's an adventure mystery. It's set in Canada. It's quite autobiographical. Sarah's Canadian. And it's about a bunch of kids who have an adventure and solve a mystery. And those kids just happen to have 2 mums. So The Curse of Grandma Maple. So that was a lot of fun. Took me a long time, but I launched that couple of, well, I don't know. Yeah, have to add a year for COVID, don't you? So a couple of years ago, I think now. Yeah, Patricia Cavelis actually launched that for me, and it was, I had about 100 people. It was a fabulous, fabulous event.
That's wonderful, Jac. And I'm hoping when we do another conversation with you that we might even explore that in detail, because one of the things that we hope to do through this series of voices is to really provide a platform for young people who may be listening to this, who are in high schools or universities, who, you know, feel they're exploring their authentic self, and or they might have a best friend or a relative, and it's really sometimes hard to get these resources that are written by people with their own lived experiences, or have an understanding of the power of language in these narrative forms, to really give a sense of connection. You know, we all want to connect.
You know, for me, writing is huge. It's my therapy. It's probably my survival. You know, if you Google me, I've written a lot of stuff over a long time.
Yes.
Pretty much, you know, for a while I was blogging. So on I realized this, I went back and had a look a while ago, that every kind of critical thing I've been involved with in my life. I wrote a blog about, which is kind of cool now because my memory's shot, right? Totally hopeless, but it's all there. But I think, writing persuasively, writing to change is really hugely valuable. And that's, for me, that's, the fiction was fun, writing the Grandma Maypole, but mostly what I've done throughout my life and what I really always come back to is, how do you write to change? How do you write to change somebody's mind? And I love exploring that idea.
And Jac, how does that, as a writer, you give so much of yourself and your authenticity in your writing? How does that leave you in terms of what do you keep still private for yourself?
Good question. A good question. Not a lot, actually. There's a couple of things. I'll keep those to myself. But I certainly, anything in relation to community, to advocacy, from teaching to getting rid of special religious instruction at my kids' school, to all the work we did around marriage equality. That was 15 years of campaigning. All my kids were involved in that, and Sarah. We ran the legal case that kick-started it right at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's a whole raft of things that I don't know. For me, I think your lived experience and sharing your lived experience is the most powerful way of creating change. That's what I do. I do it through writing, and I do it through presenting and training as well. When I run professional development and training seminars and workshops, the feedback I get is what is most effective, and what resonates with people is my sharing stories. I tell a lot of stories because it's what changes people. It's what resonates with people. It's what they understand. And I've probably got an anecdote over my 35 years. I've got an anecdote for pretty much anything. And if I haven't got one of myself, I've got one, my friend Jason, or somebody else I know, around the kids, the community. And that's the most effective way to bring about change, to my mind.
And tell us a little bit about your consultancy. If people who are watching this, or universities or organisations, are interested, tell us a little bit about what you can do for.
So I suppose the other part of my work is that for the last 4 years, I've been working with Vincent Care. So, which is it's a Catholic charity, provides services for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, family violence, drug and alcohol, etc. And Vincent Care engaged me to lead their Rainbow Tick Accreditation. So Rainbow Tick Accreditation is it's a process by which an organisation can go through a really, really rigorous assessment and change to make their organisation and their service a great place to work for queer folk and a great service. I'm very, very proud of the fact that Vincent Care is the first Catholic organisation to get a Rainbow Tick, which is, I think, it's freaking phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Not a Catholic.
Hands up to you, because that's
right. But if you don't change, I always say you've got to talk to people who don't agree with you. If all we do is talk to people who agree with us, then we're not going to change anything. So the fact that there is this organisation that's Catholic, that now is Rainbow Ticked, we've got a bunch of queer staff, it's been award-winning, it's been absolutely fantastic, and now there are others. We know as a community that our health and human services are really inaccessible to us in so many areas. And peer-led organisations are fantastic, but there's only a couple, there's a handful of them. And we need the health service up the road to be inclusive, and the GP and the dentist and the whatever it is. So the work I do is, as a consultant, is I work with a whole raft of organisations, mostly health and human services, but increasingly more corporates, who want to make their organisation more queer friendly, more inclusive, better for their staff, better for the clients or their customers. So that's what I do. To be honest, I don't have much capacity. I'm a little bit tired these days, I have to say. But that's what I've been doing for the last, I don't know how many years, quite a few years. So it's just lovely, and I think there's such enthusiasm out there at the moment for change. I really do. One of the things that was interesting in the last Pride Month, there was a lot of criticism about corporates and businesses. Oh, they're just, you know, after the pink dollar and they're putting a flag on. But I think, you know, I know many of those corporates are really making an effort, and they're being led by queer staff and champions, and they're making a real huge effort to make their businesses really queer friendly. And I for one, I think that's fantastic and commendable.
I agree on that, because something that I grew up in the 70s and 80s when there was like no visibility, you know, for
Yeah,
someone like myself growing up in the western
yeah,
suburbs and then trying to navigate my way into the mainstream world, that around the cities in Melbourne, that there was no, you know, I remember longing in the 80s, if only I could have one shop or something I can look at for a symbol, somewhere where I can be myself and walk into and to be valued for even 5-10 minutes.
yeah,
And when I see that now, and I see that, and I know that there is that contention or bit of tension in our queer community in relation to this, I feel like saying, you know, let's think back to what it was like when we were in the 80s and all we wanted was allies, just
yeah,
one organization. And now we have that. We have businesses who are going on and are willing to put their face to our cause, to our visibility. To me, that's an achievement. And
yeah.
people like yourself, Jack, have led that way. And looking back now, Jack, at your journey of 35 years, do you sit back ever and think, wow, where I like the Jack that's in 2021, looking back to say 1980, did you ever believe you would be here?
Um, you know, I kind of did, actually. I
That's
think
fantastic.
I think I'm a bit of a zealot, right? I don't know what it is. I've never quite been able to analyze it completely, although I'm in therapy at the moment and I'm working on this. But there is a part of me, you know, I think for a lot of us, the reason why we do this is because, you know, we weren't safe as kids.
Mm.
You know, there was no, I grew up in Borehamwood in this little place just outside London in the, you know, 60s and 70s. There was nothing. There was nothing on the telly. There was
Mm.
zero for most of my, really, for all of my adolescence until my early 20s. We just did not exist. You know, there was Are You Being Served? You know, the John Inman character, gay man. There was Martina Navratilova, bless her, first, you know, first time.
Yeah.
But there was nothing. So it was not a safe place for us to be who we were. So I think for me, you know, what I've come to recognize is that, you know, I've spent my life trying to make the world safe for other queer folk, and especially for young queer folk, because it wasn't safe for me.
Mm. And how have your children, you've had wonderful children growing up in a very loving uh, home, how have they now transitioned to adulthood in terms of, I guess, their worldview of where things
Look,
are?
you'll laugh, Rick, but so my three are 18, 16, and 14.
Oh.
Yeah, they're pretty scary, actually, I have to say. They're awesome. You know, they were incredibly involved in their own right in marriage equality. They're very political. They're very astute. They basically think that Sarah and I are pretty, you know, bit old-fashioned,
Oh.
very progressive, bit fuddy-duddy, really not very with it, bit behind the times. You know, because their world is entirely and completely different.
Mm.
And that is absolutely fantastic and how it should be. So
Mm.
really we get, you know, we have to be careful what we say. Like, you know, sitting around the dinner table, we have to be really careful what we say, because we will get pulled up for things. We will get in trouble for things, whether it's pronouns or
Mm.
terminology or making assumptions. And their, you know, their world is so completely and utterly different.
Mm.
That is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
I
How
love
do you feel platforms like we've got now Twitter, we've now got Instagram, we've now got
it.
TikTok, and some of my early research is showing that a lot of I know within the trans community, especially in not gender non-conforming young people within, say, the ages between 8 and 14, seem to be really using these platforms
Yeah.
as a way to authenticate, validate, affirm their developing selves. How does that
Yeah, look,
make you? Yeah.
I think there's a double-edged sword there. I think it's absolutely fantastic that young folk have access to all of that, and I think it is very affirming. And it's, you know, there's access to information that we never had. What I worry about, bigger picture, what I worry about a little bit with mine, and this is broadly for this generation, is that they have access to so much, and it's quite negative. A lot of the stuff out there, just the access to the news, to what's happening with climate change, with the global pandemic, with politics. It's very, very negative. So my kids, for example, you know, they consume a lot of overseas media. They know what's going on in the States and in Europe. And sometimes I have to remind them that, you know, their lives are actually pretty fucking awesome. You know, they're living in Melbourne. They're living in this fantastic city. They're like, they've freaking got anything that they want. They're getting a good education. They can go off to uni if they want. And so that there's a very pessimistic and gloomy outlook, I think, that people have generally. So broader than just the queer community, but that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. So I think there's a bit of a balance. I think that's the downside. But I think absolutely for so many young queer folk, that connection and visibility through social media is critical. You know, especially if you're not in the city, if you're out somewhere rural and regional, then what have you got? You haven't got anything. So really, really important, I think, to have access to all of that.
And Jack, finally, I want to ask one thing. What advice would you give to, say, academics, researchers, and students who want to work in the LGBTIQ space?
Look, it's interesting. I've worked with quite a few academics and researchers, and some are really, really helpful and some not. So I think academics and research and evidence is absolutely massively and critically important for us, for a community, because it's about visibility. It's about being seen, heard, recognized, numbered, counted, the freaking census that we're not in again. So, you know, I respond positively and with great joy to any request for research, and I fill out surveys and I answer questions because I think it's really, really important. I think the critical factor is, you know, I work with, say, Rainbow Health Victoria. They do a lot of research and it's really, really kind of action-based, and they turn that research into useful tools for me as an advocate or as a consultant or for someone working in who's a case manager or a CEO. So I think that's the critical part. It's about gathering all of that useful research and evidence, but then making sure that it is accessible and useful. Because otherwise, what's the point? You might just do it yourself and talk to your colleagues. So I think it's critically important, but the most important thing is to make sure that it is relevant and useful for the people that you're researching. And I think that involves really making sure that in part of that process that you're talking to people who are going to use that research. So I think that sometimes that gets missed. That little bit there where it's the actual this research you're doing, how is it going to change the world, how is it going to be important, what is it going to evidence? And it's really critical, I think, to make sure that you know that and you do that and you have those discussions with the people for whom this research will be useful. Otherwise it will stay in the library shelf or on the internet and you've wasted your time.
Jac Tomlins, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom and your lived experience with us on the Voices series. And we hope to see you soon and hear more about your wonderful life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.